again, I'm George Silverman, the MindSkills guy. Um, I'm an ex-psychologist. I'm a marketing consultant. I've written a couple of books, several books on marketing, most notably Secrets of Word of Mouth Marketing. Started the whole word of mouth marketing movement. An international speaker, and I'm at the moment writing the MindSkills Playbook, which is a live book that's being written, and you can watch it as it's being written because I post each chapter as I write them. Uh, so it's a written book and it's an oral book. In other words, some of the spaces I do go in the book. Some of the things I teach, I demonstrate in spaces, as we will possibly today, um, and they go in the book. So if I do an exercise with people and they're willing to do it publicly, uh, if it works out well, it will, and is quite illustrative of what I was saying abstractly and describing, then it'll go in the book. So that's me. Dr. Ram and Samantha, why don't you guys jump in and introduce yourselves very quickly? You know I like very short introductions. So, and then Dr. Ram, if he reads his, I call it the list. Every polymath's got the list. A list is the list of things you do that you're expert in. And Saman's, last time I spoke to him, is 74 and rising. Mine is 54, but who's counting? You know, and I discover another one or two every couple of days, and so I think Saman's is longer than mine because he's got a better memory, but mine is probably longer than his because I've lived longer. So go ahead, whoever would like to jump in. You know I don't call on people.
Sure. So mine is quick because I always just read the profile I've come up with, and that's that this is Dr. M. I'm a physician, consultant, and founder of ThoughtWorks, working to incubate and accelerate human development.
Perfect. We'll get into more of that later.
All right. So yeah, my list is, I think everyone's list would be really long in the room when you start to subcategorize
Absolutely.
like what Dr. M did there. So by the way, Dr. M is a physician. So it's not just his branding, he actually is a doctor. So I'm Samantha Postman, I'm Canadian.
We won't hold
and
that
I'm
against
actually
you.
Hey, I like to put that on there. We like to be the peacemakers. It works for us. So yeah. Also, I'm the founder of the Medici Modern Polymaths, of sponsoring this space, and quite a few of our members are here today. So pretty excited about that. I'm a serial entrepreneur and a business consultant, and I run spaces on thought leadership and multidisciplinary skill sets called Polymathy. And also, I'm like everyone else, it depends what you want to talk to me about. At the moment, my husband and I run a farm. We also, well, not at the moment, we've been running one for almost 30 years, but at the moment we're in the middle of harvest. So we just finished harvesting our lentils and we're moving on to the pea crop, which gets shipped internationally. So that's something unique that
Two
a
of
lot
my
of people don't
favorite
know.
soups. Oh my God. Yes,
If you
your
come
stuff
here,
is
I'll give you
probably
a
in my
jar of
soup.
each.
Lentil soup and pea lentil soup,
Well,
actually.
you know, to be honest, they could have come from our farm. They do get shipped internationally.
Oh, okay. Well, we're international. You're in Canada. We're here in the
Yeah, they
United
ship, a
States.
lot
So
of it goes to
I
India,
I
but
heard that a
yeah.
boat. We heard that a boat.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
practicing the Canadian boot. Okay.
I don't say boot,
Well,
I say bout.
uh-huh. Okay. So, welcome everybody. Uh, the purpose of today's discussion is to fill out the concept of polymath a little bit more, um, to explain a little bit more about the mental processes involved in being a polymath and what mental skills are most useful in polymathy. Uh, so let's first, as Voltaire said, always define your terms first. He said it in French and he didn't quite use that phraseology, but you get the point. If you want to be clear, you got to define your terms. So basically, a polymath is a person whose expertise spans, let's call it a significant number. I like to say three or more, significant number of subject areas, and that person is drawn to it draws on complex bodies of knowledge to solve specific problems. I'm going to go into what I mean by that in a little while, but it's basically cross field solutionizing, problem solving, decision making. You use what you learn in one field in the other field. And boy, do I have the perfect analogy for that. I can't wait. Here goes. Now, by the way, I want Samantha and Dr. M to be critics, constructive critics of this. They're hearing this for the first time. So I mean, we could have people react to this, and that would eat up the whole hour. So I'm going to ask for their reactions. What did you like about this analogy? What do you not like about this analogy? And this is so I see some requests already for the floor, but it's going to be in teaching mode for a little while. Then we're going to open it up for Q&A. But so you're going to critique what I'm saying. This is George giving a sports analogy, which you're never going to hear, which you've never heard before, and you may never hear again. I'm not a big sports fan. I did engage in 2 major sports. I was an expert windsurfer and skier, but never team sports. And I'm not a sports fan. I don't watch TV. So you may hear some kind of ignorant sports words from me, but boy, did I find the perfect analogy. And it's this. So the polymath is adept, is accomplished, is proficient in several different fields. And they use the proficiency in one field to inform and increase the skill of what they do in the other fields. So the perfect analogy for this, well, let me hold off for tantalize you for another moment. The polymath is contrasted with the specialist, which doesn't really need explanation. The specialist concentrates on one field. So, for instance, in sports, you get these superstars. You get the Tiger Woods. You get who was golfing since before he could talk. The Tiger Woods story is well known, but it's amazing. He ate, lived, slept golf since the age of 1.5 or 2, probably 1.5. As contrasted with Roger Federer, whose mother was a tennis instructor but never taught him tennis. He was proficient in about 20 different sports. He was a soccer star, and he was in many, many different sports, and he took up tennis almost as an afterthought. And long after his peers had lessons for years and years and years with well-known tennis coaches, he first took up tennis. And of course, the rest is history. So Federer is a polymath, and Roger and Tiger Woods is a specialist. And by the way, this is from the beginnings of a book called Range, Range. I think the subtitle is something like, somebody can look it up on Google, on Amazon, something like How Generalists Thrive in a Specialist World or something like that. It's a brilliant book. So we all know about specialists. The great analogy that I came up with for polymaths is the multi-sports, the triathlon, the heptathlon, and the decathlon. So let's take the decathlon. 10 different sports over 2 days. I can't rattle them off, but they're running things like the 200 meter, 400 meter, 800 meter, and 1500 meter race. I think 800 meters, about 1/4 of a mile. So there are various kinds of races going from sprints to dashes to runs. They are also shot put, javelin, long jump. I'm doing this from memory, and high jump. High jump and what's the one with the pole? Pole vault. So they're very different skills. The pole vault does not resemble the 1,500-meter run, except it does because it has a run up to it. So the famous people are the specialists. There are many exceptions, like Roger Federer. The decathlon people are not famous, and they're not the best. They're not the best at any individual sport. This is really important. This is why this analogy is so great. The shot put champion of the world is way, way better, usually, and I stress usually because there are many exceptions, usually way better, the specialist shot put is way better than the winner of the decathlon is in shot put. Okay, the winner of the decathlon is damn good. He's 90th percentile, 95th percentile, who knows, but not the best in the world. The pole vaulter, the champion pole vaulter in the world, jumps higher than the decathlon pole vaulter. But the decathlon pole vaulter is damn good. So the only really famous, at least to me, again, I don't follow sports a lot, so maybe you guys know a lot of famous decathlon, but the only one that really became famous, and he became super famous, was Jim Thorpe, the first person who ran the decathlon. Oh, sorry, who won the decathlon in 1912, I believe it was, in Stockholm. And the King of Stockholm, when he actually got 2 gold medals, I think, in the heptathlon and which is 7, I think, and the decathlon, which is 10. He got 2 gold medals from the King of Sweden, who pronounced him, as all decathlon winners are now pronounced, greatest athlete in the world. So the winner of the decathlon is widely acknowledged in all of sports to be the greatest in the world, the greatest athlete in the world, not the greatest shot putter, not the greatest high jumper, not the greatest long jumper, etc. You get the idea. But the greatest athlete in the world. And, you know, it's superfluous to say best all-around athlete in the world. That's what's meant. So I think I made the point. How did decathlon, this is very relevant to polymaths, how did decathlon runners train? Well, not equally in all sports. Very interesting. I'm just reading about this myself. So I'm like a day ahead of you guys on this one. They, for instance, concentrate, I think the heptathlon people concentrate on the 200-meter dash, and the decathloners concentrate on the 400-meter. Why? Because decathlon, and I'll just say decathlon, and I mean all the sports. The triathlon is different. It's bicycle, running, and swimming. So they're completely different sports. But to train for the decathlon, they train in the 400-meter because it trains in both speed, agility, endurance, and strength. That's the one sport that hits them all. It hits timing. You need perfect timing for the long jump and the shot put and the pole vault. You run up to it, and there's usually a few little steps right before. Boom, boom, boom. So some sports emphasize endurance, some strength, some agility, some timing. But the decathlon, you got to have them all. That's why that person's pronounced the best athlete in the world. And the 200-meter in heptathlon and the 400-meter in decathlon sets you up for everything. And there's a lot of theory about the training. Um, the there is sequential training and continuous training, but the point is that everything informs everything else. You got to have speed, you got to have agility. So how does that apply to the polymath? I think it's pretty obvious. We polymaths train in a multiplicity of sports, a multiplicity of disciplines, let's call them. And what we learn in one thing, we apply to the other. So what's the one thing we concentrate on, like the 400 millimeter, I don't know if it's called dash or run or whatever. It's kind of between the two in my mind.
It's the 400 meter.
400 meter.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the polymath's equivalent of the 400 meter run? It's a couple of things. It's what I call going meta. That is knowing your cognitive style, knowing what process you're in when you're in it so you can change it. And number two, super learning. Polymaths are super learners. We learn things just for the sake of learning sometimes, not because there's a purpose in it other than the fact that we love learning. We love to learn a new thing. We love the uncertainty. We love the frustration. We love the feeling of ignorance fading away, the feeling of incompetence becoming a little more competent each day. We focus on our progress rather than our incompetence. And so we're super learners. We can take on anything, learn it quickly. We know how to focus on the essentials. We know how to leave out the details. We can learn things way faster than the specialists who have the luxury of just concentrating on one thing. And the third thing I would mention is curiosity. I want to stop here and get some reactions from Dr. M and Samantha.
Well, first of all, I actually was a track runner. So the
Oh, that's
analogy
cool.
works for
I
me.
did not know that.
No,
That is
I
so
did
cool.
my events were shot put, discus, and a sprint racing. I did try long distance, but it didn't work for me, which actually makes sense because my personality is much more sprinter than long distance running. So, um,
That's so true.
yeah, I think your analogy works awesomely well. And my brain was going crazy because I'm going to back up a little bit because, first of all, I was thinking, if you were going to run the Olympics and you were in charge of, and you needed somebody in charge of the track, you would want to hire the decathlon, you would want to hire that person because they understand the full picture and where all the events are and how they interrelate. Because if you only run one specialty, like if you hire just the person who does sprinting, they only understand that one tiny part of the track. They don't
Right.
understand how all the other pieces fit together because there is collisions. There can be collisions, but you want it to be symbiotic, to run together so that's a good flow. So the average person wouldn't even know all this behind the scenes because you need the shot put and the discus to go into a certain area with a certain amount of distance. And obviously you don't want people throwing those big balls on runners and things like that, right? So
Right.
if you want to hire somebody who understands the really large picture and understands the specific needs of each of the events, you want to hire the person who has a specialty in a lot of them.
Perfectly said. Oh, the specific needs. I love that. That is exactly what we're talking about.
And even though I wasn't a long distance runner, the fact that I was a sprinter, I understand the track itself. So
Right.
that alone, so even though I may not have a specialty in long distance running, because I have a specialty in just in that area, which would be running, which is different than throwing like a shot put, I still would be a good candidate because I obviously was in with the runners. Like I know what it means to get out of the blocks, if that makes sense. I know what it means to where you need to put the blocks, because we're both using the block. Long distance runners don't necessarily use blocks. They don't need to because timing doesn't matter as much as it does in sprinting. So that was just one analogy that I thought would be really good. That's why you want to find somebody who's really worked hard at learning multiple areas.
Right.
Now, the other thought part that I really loved about your analogy is I started to think about how we could start to create polymaths at a faster rate what skills do we need to teach first? So like that's what you were alluding to that, and you were
Right.
talking about how with these multi-event runner or multi-event participants, the 400-meter makes sense, which does make sense. Because a
Hmm.
400-meter does require quite a bit more endurance than like a sprinter, surprisingly. Like between a 100-meter and a 400-meter is actually quite a difference.
Gigantic.
But there's a lot of overlap. So I understand that. So when you were
Hmm.
talking about meta, so then I thought, is there a way that we can come up with a process to help get polymath there faster? Like many of us learned it kind of by mistake. It happened. We weren't
Yeah.
intentional about it. But when we go back and look back, we can go and go, what do we do that other people don't do? Well, I know one of them is pattern recognition. So
Hmm.
we recognize patterns very, very quickly, and we're able to project in the future. Like sometimes I can project things a year in advance, and people are like, no, you can't. And I'll like make a projection, and not everything, obviously I'm not like have some special skills, but like, but I am really good at pattern recognition. So when I see the trajectory going in a certain place, I'm very easily able to see, oh, I've seen this before, I've seen it in history, I've gathered all this data. And so pattern recognition really helps. And when I'm
Hmm.
learning a new skill, the first thing I do is what's similar to what I already know. So essentially what I'm saying, what patterns are similar? And then I like, oh, okay, I know that. And then I gain confidence very, very quickly because already I might know 10, 20, 30% of the new skill simply. And with that confidence, I'm more likely to learn the things that I don't know because I've already gained confidence, because I already feel confident
Right.
about a good part of it.
Hmm.
Confidence alone will accelerate your ability to gain a new skill.
Exactly.
Confidence alone will accelerate
Right.
your ability to gain a new skill. So
Yep.
I'll let Simon Dr.
Mm.
M drop in for this too. But I was super excited about your analogy, and yeah, you didn't know
Oh,
that
I'm
I
so
was
I
on the
didn't know you
track.
were in track. Samantha,
See
the
my
shot
background,
putter.
a lot of people
I
don't
have a
know. I
picture.
actually
I will never be able to leave that picture now. I can imagine Samantha shot. You got to show me some pictures of your shot putting. That's
actually I
or
don't think there
discus
is.
or whatever.
I don't think there is any, because I
Oh
don't
man,
think, and
Samantha, the shot
I
put.
actually competed like around the state, like would I actually competed. And like, those pavilions that you like where you guys go to concerts and
Yeah,
or like big
yeah, yeah.
hockey arenas, we actually
Hmm.
had to run all those stinking stairs to train. Like I'm not
Oh man.
joking. Every single
Yeah, so
step up and on the
that's
top
a
of the
good
bottom floor.
analogy, like the stairs in Rocky. He did stairs.
Oh, it was
So
insane
and
how many
it's the cross.
stars.
So I almost called MindSkills mental cross training. Came very, very, very close.
Yeah,
The reason I didn't do it is because it conjures up ideas of sweat and work. They call them workouts. I'd rather
uh,
write the playbook than the work,
but
because
there
I want to stress play, because this is we play. Polymaths don't um they don't go through the kind of stuff that the specialists go through. We're playing,
That's
and
right.
they're working. We're playing.
well, even the
No,
fact that I did
these
more
are
than
gross
one.
overgeneralizations, and I admit that. So don't call me out
But even
on
the
the
fact I did more than
generalizations.
one sport isn't common. Like in my
Right,
track team,
right,
most people
right,
would, if they ran the 100, they ran the 200. Whereas
right.
I did the 100, I didn't run the 200, and then I did shot put and discus, which are two different, completely different types of sports and
Completely,
different trainings. One is upper
completely.
body training, and
Right.
one is more lower body. But before
Let me give
I
you
jump, I just
you,
want to say one more
yes,
thing before
sure, sure, sure.
Dr. M drops in. So you've heard me talk
No
about
worries.
that hurdle analogy that I use a lot about.
Yep.
I don't see obstacles, I see hurdles, because hurdles
Right.
is something you can see through. You can push them over, walk around,
Now
jump
you never
over.
told me you did the hurdles though.
Well, that's why I came up with that analogy. And people all
I
over ask
never
me about
knew.
that hurdle analogy. Well, that's because I literally was on a track. And even though I didn't do hurdles competitively, those hurdles were always like they're on the same spot that a 100-meter is. So I'm in that same area. So I would literally I have a visual in my head of those hurdles all the time. So we come up with these analogies simply because of the exposure on the track team, that even though I didn't compete, I understand the hurdles and I'm able to use those analogies very easily. So
Yeah,
that's something that polymaths
we're
can do.
gonna
Yeah.
we could talk about that a lot more, because we're gonna talk about hurdles some point. But uh, every problem is a problem because there's a hurdle. There's a gap. There's something missing. There's solution needed, there's something you don't know. And Samantha and I like to call them hurdles. I sometimes call them gaps. Um, but see, she couldn't do what we do in problem solving because a hurdle, you're supposed to jump it over and you're disqualified and thrown out if you go around it. But with problem solving, you can jump over it, you can knock it down, you can go around it, you can say, screw this and do something and cut across the track diagonally. You don't have to jump the hurdle. So that's a whole other thing, though. There are a lot of analogies in here that are very instructive. But Dr. M, I'd like to get your first reactions, then I have a few things to say about the specific mind skills that will
Sure.
make people a better polymath.
Sure. Gosh, of course, I love your analogy, George.
You
You guys
damn well
touched on it.
better.
That's right. That's right.
No,
No, I
no, just
appreciate
kidding.
all your thoughts, George. No, that's a sincere expression of thought. George, so yeah, learning. Gosh, for me, it's usually learning by doing and learning just enough so as to be able to do the thing that I'm trying to do. This aspect that you guys touched on most recently, which is that you don't, or the way that I would say it is that a polymath doesn't stay in a job or a position or a profession if it bores you or if you're no longer engaged in it. And so the reason that that's a competitive advantage is because like you're going to leave your current whatever it is that you're doing, but then it means that in what is considered your work or profession, and you have a lot of hobbies too. But if you're interested and engaged, and so you do your best or better work than otherwise, and so
Right.
that's really key. And then I do feel you can say it's play or having fun, and it is actually I'm increasingly becoming aware that that's actually the component that makes a person happy. I'm noticing it in myself. I've told you and Samantha how I've not really been wealthy at any point so far in my 34 years of life, but I've really always done what I wanted to do in a sense, which part of that means I had 1,000 hobbies, and some of them are like flying remote control helicopters and are not very, very useful in well it's a hobby. So
it's not directly transferable, but you learn anticipation, you learn strategy, you learn a whole lot of things that are useful in all the rest of life by just flying those helicopters.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, curiosity, George. Yes, you had one of the sections in your MindSkills that was curiosity management, and in the new list that you published, and I think that's probably my top topic because I struggle with that. I always have to. There's always too many exciting things to do in the world, and I always have to prioritize and manage what I actually can do in the hours of the day.
Great. Thank you. Let me give you a couple of more examples of some things that could help drive this home. I have a good friend, Rhonda Smith, who's the 7-time women's windsurfing champion. She taught me all the advanced windsurfing that I did, and she taught me the woman's way, the non-strength way. She made me windsurf with my fingertips, never grasping the pole. The crossbeam, whatever, the wishbone they call it. So Rhonda married a guy who was a world champion, I think Olympic medalist skier. Okay, he was a unbelievable skier. Never windsurfed in his life. So he moved. He married Rhonda. They lived in Hood River, Oregon in the United States. Then she opened the windsurfing school in Hawaii. So she had to teach him windsurfing. So keep in mind, he was world champion skier, not the world champion, but a world champion skier. He took up windsurfing with her. 1 year later, he was making videotapes of the most advanced windsurfing maneuver there is. a particular kind of jibing, which is unbelievably hard to do. I still can't do it. Never mastered it. He had it he had it well under a year, and by the year he was making videotapes of it. Not Rhonda doing it, but him doing it. He did it better than she did. Why? Because what was in his brain could get right into his body. And I learned. I at the Club Med, I taught a lady windsurfing. She was interested in it. She walked up to me and asked me about it. I taught it to her, and by the end of the week, she beat me and everybody else in the village race, windsurfing race. And I said to her, "What the hell? What do you do for a living? Well, who are you?" She said, "Well, I'm a fighter pilot, and I'm based on a carrier, and I've just been admitted into the astronaut program. I'm going to be an astronaut." So she was the most amazing person to teach because I would show her something and she could just do it. She'd say, "Oh, yeah, okay, got it." And she would do it instantly and perfectly. And that's why, because the cross training, what she learned in one place, she used in the other place. And all my friends said, "George, you ought to take up, I know you're a really good skier, take up snowboarding. It's just like windsurfing. You're on a board. Um, you're going to be a really great snowboarder." So I took up snowboarding, took 2 days of lessons. I felt like a bunch of guys dragged me into an alley and beat the crap out of me. It was just awful. I was bruised and I could never even get up on the board. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. All my windsurfing friends were snowboarding experts except me. I just couldn't get it. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well,
So
guess what?
anyway,
I can't ski. I get like taken down the bunny hill every single time, but I wasn't competitive track and I can't ski. So
yeah, you know
like
why?
it
Because
doesn't always
You
work.
can't learn. You can't learn. It's very hard to learn on the bunny slope. You have to learn on the intermediate slope. You need a slope to learn on. If
And
it's flat, you
any
can't learn
slope
on a
results in
flat
Samantha
surface.
in the ski lodge injured. So I don't know. With me and snow doesn't mix, but anyway, I just want to say that it's okay if you're good at one sport and it doesn't always transfer. But I was really good at soccer,
Mhm.
so it just depends.
So what are some of the mind skills that um, you need as a polymath, and that you should concentrate on? If you are a polymath or an aspiring polymath, they call them multi-potentialites, um, and you like that style, first of all, celebrate it, accept it. Um, it's your cognitive style. It's a superpower, as is specialization. I'm not denigrating the specialists. I admire the specialists. My wife's a specialist. And I admire the hell out of them. I admire their concentration and their lack of distraction and a lot of things about them. It's wonderful. Um, but in some ways, it's easier. You know, I spoke to, I used to do a lot of pharmaceutical seminars. I spoke to one of the leading cancer experts in the world. And I said, "Dr. Donenfeld, how do you keep up in the field?" And he said, "What you guys don't realize is it's easy. When you're at the top of a field, you only have to read the latest 10, 20 papers that have just been written. I've studied this field for 50 years. I know, I teach it. So I know all this. I've done that, and I've done it over decades. So how it looks like I'm it looks like an impossibility to keep up with the field because you're looking at it from the standpoint of a beginner. If you're just beginning, you're doing a residency in, let's say, leukemia or cancer in general, oncology, um, you you have so much to learn, it's almost insurmountable. But I only have to read the next 20 papers in the next month. I can read one paper a day, no big deal keeping up. So the specialists have an easier time and a harder time in some ways. Um, but the skills needed for polymathy. I mentioned going meta. I'm just going to touch on these. A lot of them are in the MindSkills playbook. A lot of them will be in subsequent spaces in much greater detail. But going meta is knowing the process you're in and being able to change it when you're in the middle of it. So are you in a critical process right now, trying to figure out what's wrong with what we're saying? Or are you in a learning process right now, trying to figure out what's right with what we're saying and how does it apply to you? Are you in a questioning mode? Are you in a just take it all in and digest it later mode? That might suit you better. Are you in? So picking the mode you're in is very important. Realizing, oh my God, I'm arguing instead of asking. I'm pushing back on that person instead of asking, well, why do you believe that? Oh, I shouldn't be doing that. I should be listening more and questioning the person more. Now, questioning brings me to the next mind skill, curiosity. Curiosity is a personal attribute, but it's also a skill. How do you manage the curiosity? Let me just take a drink. Okay. So how do you manage the curiosity? How do you celebrate it? How do you realize, and how do you not get distracted? Okay. How do you, bright, shiny object. How do you not go off after every bright, shining object and dissipate all your energies and waste your time? There's a one-word answer for that. The word is priorities. You learn what your purpose is. There's an article in the MindSkills playbook about learning. I forgot the name of it off the top of my head, but it's about meaning. How do you figure out your meaning, purpose? How do you discover your meaning, purpose, and passion? So once you know your meaning, purpose, and passion, particularly your purpose in life, your life mission, what you're all about. Since 17, I've been all about mind skills. I didn't call it that, but it's about the mental skills. In psychology, it would be called metacognition, except I'm not only interested in cognition, I'm interested in emotions and behavior as well. The three major parts of psychology, not just the cognitive part. So I've been interested. So I do what's on purpose because it fills me with passion. I love doing it. It doesn't feel like work. I could do it 18 hours a day. But if it's off purpose, I'm bored and I'm literally incompetent. I can't do it. I'm a crappy language learner. I can list dozens and dozens of things that I'm really terrible at because I'm just not interested and I can't get myself to be interested in it. So that's the polymath when you're on purpose, that organizes your curiosity. Another mind skill is super learning. There are two books. I forgot the one is by, I think it's Paul Graham. I can't remember the other one, but one is called Ultra Learning and another one's called Super Learning. But there are a whole lot of books. There's also what is it? Altucher has another book on learning. There are a lot of really great books on learning things fast. Tim Ferriss is the guy who's the expert at that. He wrote a cookbook basically teaching you the basics of cooking so you could become a really good cook in a few hours of work. And that brings me to the next thing that's really, really important. It's been my lifelong secret. I've known about it for a long, long time. I know the exact conversation where I learned it. And that is what Elon Musk talks about a great deal. It is what I call thinking in fundamentals. Aristotle and Elon Musk call it thinking in first principles. I got it from a conversation I had with Ayn Rand, the novelist, and further discussions with Alan Greenspan, the economist. Alan did an amazing lecture saying, let's say there was no such thing as money. and he invented money in a lecture. And it wasn't about the money. It was what was an eye opener to me was how he and Ein thought in fundamentals. They would ask, here's how you think in fundamentals and what it is. It's real easy to do. You say, what is the concept or concepts or idea that's at the root of all the other ideas? And what are those? What is that one idea or that small cluster of ideas? In other words, what are the concepts that give rise to the concepts I'm talking about? So I did expert focus groups. I invented the telephone focus groups. That the main rationale for doing it by telephone was that I could get experts that nobody else could get into the face-to-face groups that were running. So I became the specialist and the go-to person in the whole country and the whole world for doing expert groups. So I had to do Fortune 100 presidents. I did congressmen, Nobel Prize winning economists, the leaders of every medical specialty. So how did I study? I studied up on these subjects in a matter of hours. Not well enough to teach them, but well enough to run an intelligent focus group about it and ask insightful questions. Not the first questions, but the follow-up questions. That's the big trick, the follow-up questions and the follow-up to that and getting in deeper and deeper and deeper. You have to have a lot of knowledge about the subject. So the way I did it was I went to the client and I said, I'm going to ask you a bunch of really stupid questions. You're going to really wonder why you hired me if I'm asking such basically stupid questions. But it's my approach to things. You'll see why I do it in a little while, but indulge me. And I would ask this, like when I had to do one on factor 8 and hematology. I went to the client, I said, tell me, I gave that little preamble, and then I said, what is blood? They looked at me like I had come down from Mars. What is the basic fundamental function of blood? And what properties does it have to have, or the organism would die? And one of those properties, of course, is clotting, and factor 8 affects the clotting. So by getting into the fundamentals, there are very few things you have to learn, number one. They are, number two, all of them, without exception, are simple. Everything starts with a simple concept. Everything. Nuclear physics starts with the simplest of concepts. You grasp those, you could be a nuclear physicist eventually, and efficiently. It still may take a few years, but you'll do it. You could do it 10 times faster. You can accelerate learning. This is going to be hard for a non-polymath to understand. Polymaths will get it immediately. You can learn most things that people learn in 1/10 to 1/100th the time. This 10,000 hour stuff is probably true if you want to be the best musician in the world. If you want to be the greatest violinist in the world, I can tell you from firsthand experience, you're going to need 10,000 hours or more. And I only put in 4,000. So I never got where I wanted to be. I've put in 20,000 hours in doing magic. And so I'm up there. I'm considered one of the top close-up magicians in the world. But I put in the time, but I did it efficiently. I said, what are the few pieces of sleight of hand that you have to master? What will let me do everything else? Well, there's one thing called the classic pass, and I realized that is the key to it all. So I went to the leading expert in how to do it. He was a PhD psychologist friend of mine. He said, George, I'll teach it to you if you will agree to practice it 300 times, 300 to 500 times a day for the next 5 years. Or I won't teach it to you at all because you'll never get it. There are only 5 people in the world who could do it, by the way. Still to this day, probably 10 people who can do the classic pass well. So I practiced it 500 times a day for 5 years, actually. I still do it 50 to 100 times a day. I do it while I'm driving. I drive with my knees and I do it. Some people don't want to be in the car with me. So, but it's the basic thing that lets me do everything else. It lets me, at 80 years of age, which I am now, I still have 40-year-old hands, 30-year-old hands. So you go to the core skill, the skill that's going to give rise to everything else. And that's what you'll learn. So I want to mention a couple of other things very quickly, and we can open it to questions and statements and all that. This is mostly teaching mode today, for those of you who joined us late. Any of you who came expecting my controversial interactive mode, that's not what we're doing today. So there are a couple of other, I don't know if they're mind skills or just things to do, but one of the most important things about polymathy is you must learn to defeat perfectionism. I want to talk to you a little bit about that quickly if I can. The Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, you've all heard of it. 20% of the effort or 20% of the input yields 80% of the output. So most of what you do, 80% of what you do is due to 20% of the effort. But the Pareto principle applies to the Pareto principle. So 80% of 80% is 64%, and 20% of 20% is 4%. And it also holds 4%. Get this, hold on to your chairs. 4% of your effort yields 64% of your output. And it seems to be true one more time. 80% of 64% is 52%, I think, believe. Check me out on that. So we'll say around 50%. And 20% of 4% is 0.8%. So we'll call that 1%. So here's the bottom line. Between 1 and 5% of your effort, your time, your effort, your energy, your resources yield about 50%. Actually, 50%, 1 to 5% yields about 50% to 2/3 of the output. Get that? Let me repeat it. 1 to 5% of your effort and time, if it's the right 1 to 5%, that's a big if. If it's the right 1 to 5%, yields 50% to 2/3 of the output. So 2/3 is 64%. You could be at the 64% level with only 4%, with under 5% of the effort and time. So polymaths get that. They don't shoot for 100%. Usually. Some do. Roger Federer certainly did. And there are notable exceptions. Ben Franklin was the greatest electrical engineer of his time. He knew more about electricity, the greatest electrical scientist. He knew more about electricity than any scientist in the whole world. He was right at the top. So some people do get to be first and a polymath. But usually the polymaths are going for 80, 85%, 90% in many different fields. And what they do is they combine different fields. So when I was asked to do focus groups of physicians, I grew up in my father's drugstore. My earliest memories are going to my father's drugstore and playing with the leeches that he sold. Our drugstore sold leeches. Dr. M probably knows a little bit about that. I don't know. He's maybe too young. But we used to use leeches for boils, and my father sold them, and they're these slimy, sluggy little things, and I was just fascinated by them as a kid. Anyway, so I learned about all the drugs, and he taught me how to fill prescriptions, and I made suppositories, and I filled capsules, and I didn't do any compounding because that could kill people. So my father was a little careful about that. He didn't let me mix stuff, but he did let me fill capsules. And so I learned about all the different drugs. So when the pharmaceutical firms came, I wasn't intimidated by that stuff, you know. Um, so I became the focus group moderator who knew medicine. I didn't have to be an MD. There were some MD moderators. One of my biggest competitors in the area was an MD, but people told me I was a better moderator. They came to me. So did I have, I didn't even have 80% of what it takes to be a doctor. I had 10%, you know, less, 5% maybe, but enough to let me do those groups. So polymaths combine all the different areas into one thing. So I could teach, for instance, decision making. I could go to a client when I was a marketing consultant. I could go to a client and teach a course on, like, do a morning on the customer decision process. And I did it all by magic tricks. Now, there are people out there who know about the customer decision processing and teach the customer decision process. And there are magicians out there, but there are no magician decision experts. I was the only one in the world. So that's the way polymaths get their edge. I could compete with some people in some things because I was the only one in the world who could do it. And did I do each of these individual things best in the world? No, not even close, but good enough. And so that's what the polymath learns. Good enough, which is to them actually a pretty high standard of excellence. I mean, most people think good enough, just enough to get by. Polymaths do want to excel, and we do want to be excellent as we can, up to a point. Up to a point. We don't have to be the best in the world. Being the 250th best close-up magician in the world is just fine for me. I attend a invitational only magic convention. That's 200 to 250 of the leading close-up magicians in the world. Being the worst one in the room, which I probably am, the people there are so awesome, it's unbelievable. I'm known as the guy who understands the psychology of magic, probably better than anybody in the room, but I am not the best performer in the room. I am the worst performer in the room, probably. Although I can think of one or two worse. But because they have other specialties within magic. So you've got to be able to defeat your perfectionism, pursue your passions, and as a passion, not as a defense. There are too many polymaths who use their multiple interests to keep themselves from committing to one thing. Now, the thing should not be a specialty. It should be a combination of things, but it should be something. That's the challenge of the polymath, to find that combination of 2, 3, 4 things. You know, Gene Autry was the singing cowboy in movies, and he was an amazing songwriter. I think he wrote White Christmas or something. But, you know, there were no singing. He was the first and only singing cowboy. That's the polymath. You got to be the singing cowboy. You got to be the decision-making magician, or whatever it is. There's a whole list of other things for polymaths that I have down here that we're not going to be able to get into. But there is a skill, there's a set of skills. What I want to leave you with is there's a set of skills that enables polymathy that's different than the set of skills that enables specialization. And it's the polymath that's the integrator in this world of specialization, in this world of silos. Everybody being in their silos, they're the ones who connect the silos. They're the ones who make the discovery. They're the Einsteins. Einstein was not the greatest physicist in the world. Einstein was the most imaginative physicist in the world. And he said that in a variety of ways. There's a dozen quotes about look up Einstein imagination quotes, and you'll find a dozen quotes about Einstein talking about imagination. He said he wasn't the smartest. He was the most imaginative. Feynman used to brag that he only had 128 IQ, but he was one of the greatest physicists in the world. But what a polymath Feynman was, Richard Feynman. Look him up. He had the skills. Um, he had the mental processes. Um, he knew that knowing the names of all the birds told you nothing about the birds. Feynman knew, look at the bird, not the word for the bird. It's a famous Feynman story. Uh, that's the polymath, an awareness of your own thinking skills. So I'm going to stop here and open the floor to first comments from Dr. M and Samantha, and let anybody who wants to come up and make a comment or uh, particularly ask a focused question. But first, let's Samantha and Saman, let's.
I'm good, George. I'm
I just been
happy to
holding
get
the
into
fort here
discussion
and
with people.
got on a roll.
No, sounds good. We've been listening, George.
I see.
Yeah, I love this teaching session. And I love that with Twitter Spaces now, we have that chat feature in the bottom right-hand corner. For any of you who haven't been in Spaces for a while, there's a way for you to interact in this space.
Yeah.
And that's for you to comment. And Dr. M and I have been chatting with some of you in the chat. So go down and chat. That is available to you after the space closes, and George's recording is there. So you can interact there, get some responses there. So yeah, super excited
Thank
about
you. Yeah, I didn't look at the chat once because I
yeah, that's
got on
because
a
you were
roll and
teaching.
I
So
was trying to concentrate on what I was saying, and it would have been just a gigantic distraction. Um, and I really can't use the chat. Madeline Sklar does it. She's able to run a whole group and watch the chat at the same time, and I keep kidding her about it. But I don't know how she does it. I can't. I just can't do it.
yeah, I want to respond to what you said, George, but before I
Sure.
do that, I think it'd be just good to just it's the top of the hour. If we could just do a really light reset at this point. We want to
Sure. That's a
welcome.
very good.
Yeah, because what you
Go.
said was a bit to process. So for all of you who've just joined in or been here since the beginning, welcome. This is a series that so I founded a community called the Medici Modern Polymaths. It's specifically for polymaths. It's a private community that you apply to be part of. And what we've done is under Gia, you'll see her there with the really long, beautiful hair and glasses. She helped our community initiate these spaces where every week some members in our community create a space at their own time. They just pick a week and it's whenever it works in their schedule that week. So we don't have a set schedule for you to pay attention to. Our new website will have the times on it, so you can take a look later. But so you could every week, some people in our membership are offering spaces in their own style, their own topic that they want to talk about. And so you'll notice that all of them have a little bit of a different flow to them. And so this is one of those spaces that we're sponsoring. Of course, we want to build our community as well. We're a mass movement trying to help polymaths become sought after again in the Renaissance time. You know, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo came out of it, and then we've seen some other ones later. Elon Musk is actually a polymath as well.
And Steve
So
Jobs and
Steve
right.
Jobs, Ben Franklin. I'd like to really get some names. If you're coming from a continent like Africa, I'd love to hear if you've got some polymaths there. The thing with some of these other countries, it wasn't documented the same way the European countries were very diligent about documenting. And so we will acknowledge there's been polymaths across all cultures and times. They just weren't all documented.
And genders.
And genders. So if you know of any, please forward them to me because I really would like to find some from other non-European or North American descent. So please, if you know, please let me
This
know.
was genius on Samantha's part. She saw, I mean, I've known this word since I was 17, read a book on Galileo, but she is just genius in identifying these multi-achievers, multi-accomplished people. And you know, we dusted off the word polymath. It was an old, dusty, arcane word, and we're making it cool again.
Yeah, it's a Renaissance word that was dropped. And I think because of a specialized world, it's kind of got a shame to it. And
Yep.
we're taking the shame off and making it shiny all over again. And so you'll start seeing, if you go to Quora, it'll say you're pretentious or narcissistic or arrogant or all kinds of things for putting polymath on your timeline. And it was very hard for me to put it on my timeline, especially being a female. But obviously, if I'm going to lead a movement of polymaths, I need to be, proud about the fact that I am a polymath. And so yeah, if you want to be part of the community, or I have on the top there in the nest, if you go there, it says recently founded a community. It will take you to our website that we have. We're actually going through a big revamp right now. So if you want in on the better pricing, right now is the best time to get in, because I promise you, when you see what we have planned, it is going to blow your mind. We are going to change what I have coming in
It's
September is going
unbelievable.
to literally change the polymath movement, in my personal opinion. So it's a big thing. If you want to be part of a movement like that, apply to join the group, and you can do it through the website. You can apply there. We weed out the wackos. I'm just going to say that straight up. We don't talk about politics all the time. We refer to them. It's sometimes a little part of the discussion. But if you're all about advocating for a special interest group or for politics, we're not for you. We're about self-improvement, figuring out polymaths. How can we
Right.
help polymaths in the world? And that sort of thing. So if you want to be part of that kind of movement, then we're for you. So I just wanted to make sure that
And
invite. We're an open community.
we're building we're going to have a gigantic luxury yacht someday, but right now we have a real fancy fancy raft. I don't know what you'd call. I don't
Yeah,
want to
he's
denigrate
talking
it.
about the community. It's
Right. The
beta launched.
community is, we're building it as we're doing it. And
It's basically a
it
raft.
is a
That's a good way
load
to
of
say
fun.
it.
So if you love that, if you're one of these innovator and early adopter types and you like things that are not quite there yet, not quite completed, that are being invented as we're going along, this is definitely the place for you.
Yeah,
If
well,
not, I'd wait a year.
when you see what's coming in September, it's definitely going to be a little bit more yachtish.
Right.
I
Right.
beta launched it, got the feedback from the community. What we're doing wasn't working well for polymaths. Polymaths are very unique. No other community is like a polymath. Usually you go to entrepreneur group for Web3. And so it's very specific, whereas polymaths are not like that. So I promise you, it is not an easy undertaking trying to build a community of such a
Yeah.
diversity. It's insane. But yeah, genius, insanity, they maybe go together. They probably
The
do. So
phrase is herding cats.
yeah, no, I love it too. So anyway, we'd love to have you. So I wanted to put that out there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, our
I was
newsletter, if
going
you
to get
sign
to
up for the
that, but I'm glad you
newsletter, it's
did.
not consistent yet. We haven't even put one out yet because there's just a lot to do at the beginning. Rome was not built in a day, but as George says, it was built by polymaths, one stone at a time. So that's us right now. So you're welcome to come up there. And just going back to what George said there, now that we've welcomed you in the room and we're super excited you're here, that I wanted to talk on something that is really important, because a lot of you have heard this. Oh, you're a generalist. And there's that phrase that just gets under our skin. Oh, you're a jack of all trades. You must be a master of none. And they just use that first part of that phrase, and all of us just cringe and then want to crawl under a rock. And not everyone does, but I know sometimes I just feel like they're just trying to put you in a place oh, you're nothing because you don't really know anything. You just know a little bit about a ton of things and you're not really that useful. And that's actually not true. That phrase actually has another sentence to it, that it actually says that you are often a master better than of one. And that's what George was saying, right?
Give the whole phrase. Jack of
Yeah,
all trades. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, George.
I can't remember it well. Jack of all trades, but master of none. And how does it end?
But often a better master than one. Oh, and now I'm losing it because we always
Yeah.
get mad about it in the
Something
group.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So see,
Look
no
it
one
up.
even knows the last part. It's just that's what happens when you take things out of context, because it's not convenient. So what I wanted to say to all of you, that there is a difference between a generalist and a polymath. A lot of people will call a polymath a generalist, but what George's analogy earlier, would you ever call someone who is an Olympic decathlon a generalist because they can do 10 sports well? They're not a generalist. They're a
Right.
specialist in 10 fields. So they've got expertise and mastery in 10 fields. And so
Mm-hmm.
when people call us a generalist, we are not generalists. We have multi masteries, we're multidisciplined, and we have multi expertise. Like I would be considered, probably not now because I've let my practice go, but at one time I probably would have been one of the top Canadian personal tax experts in the country. Well, that is not a generalist. That's like, and I also did professional photography where Hasbro actually came to me and asked for one of my images on a Monopoly game edition for Canada. So like that is not a generalist. That is somebody who's got multiple specialties.
Right.
And
And
the community,
the other term is dilettante. The
yeah,
dilettante, the phrase is the dilettante is a mile wide and an inch deep.
right.
And that, in other words, superficial, a gourmand rather than a gourmet. Gourmand is a dabbler. A gourmet knows his or her stuff.
And we do dabble. Like there are times when we
Yeah,
dabble because
right,
we dabble and then find out if we love it or not. And that's usually how
right.
it starts. Like when I started with photography, I dabbled. And then once I was like, I really love this. And then I pursued mastery from that point on. And then at some point, I turned it into a profession. And then I realized it took the joy away from me. So, like what George was saying about, getting divided between all of these interests, well, that's what happens to a polymath, especially as you build the masteries, and then people will pull you into them. So, I have this saying, I was interviewed on a podcast one time, and someone asked me do you fear failure? And I started laughing, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't feel failure. I mean, I do, like, just like everyone else, but what really I fear success. And then someone's like, what? Why do you fear success? And I'm like, because once you succeed at something, people steer your ship. So, like, for example, when I was really good at photography, well, all of a sudden I kept getting all these requests to do weddings and all this stuff. I don't want to do weddings. I ended up not loving photography after a while. And I ended up just bringing it back to a hobby because it's just a joy. It's a therapy for me, even though I would, I'm good at it. I don't do it all the time. Now I'm building a community. I have no time for photography very much, except for what I do on my iPhone. And so I just wanted to say to you, if you're someone's called you a generalist or called you ADHD, that's another thing we get a lot of, ADHD. You know what? It does require a little bit of what we in modern society would label ADHD. There are professionals who have said that Leonardo da Vinci was on the ADHD spectrum. Well, it requires a bit of an ADHD spectrum, but we make it sound like it's a negative thing. And we want to give medications out to everybody because we're not focused. The problem is we're not focused on what we're passionate about. The problem is when you give kids all these things they have to learn in school and they're not passionate at the moment, of course they're not paying attention and they're like antsy because either they learned it really fast or it's just they're not passionate or it's the way it's being taught.
Yeah,
So
my
we
guess
just
is that I would have been given Ritalin or something when I was a kid. It would have made me focus and ruined my life.
It probably would have. So we just want to this is what these spaces are about. We're talking about, we realize you're not a generalist, you're a polymath. And it's okay. It is hard. I've been testing this out. I was at a women's event and someone asked me what I do. And I'm just like, freeze. All of you are like, what do I say? Is this 5 minutes ago or like yesterday or last week? And I'm like, well, I'm a polymath. And like one girl was super interested. And then when I explained it, one girl thought I was being super snobby. And I was just testing the whole thing. So definitely saying you're polymath and having to explain it is not cool. So we have to figure out some ways to do that. But in the community, what's great about community is all of us can say it. I wouldn't necessarily just go, oh, I have expertise in 3 things. But in the community, we do
And
that with each other because it allows us to bring it to the table. So when George says to me, I know that he was amazing at psychology, I will ask him, tell us about ADHD because he's actually diagnosed children with ADHD and he's now relooking it as a top professional. He's relooking at that diagnosis and saying maybe that's a misdiagnosis for polymath or pre-polymath. So
mm-hmm.
because he says to me, I was a psychologist and I was accomplished in that area, I know I can have that conversation with him because it like shortcuts all that like pre-stuff where we have to pretend we don't know anything until somebody discovers it about us because we're trying to be
Yeah, and
humble.
it looks. Here's a insight I had recently. It looks very immodest. If
Mhm.
I mean, I was also a professional photographer. I made my way through college as a resort hotel photographer, and I did weddings and bar mitzvahs and portraits. Um, but so I made my living as a college student in photography. So I was a professional photographer. But if I say I'm a professional photographer, I'm a psychologist, I'm a magician, I'm a this, it looks like people don't get how you can be all those things. It looks like bragging because nobody who could do all that stuff, by the time he's 35 years old or
Oh,
whatever.
the only time it's allowed is when you die, and Wikipedia picks it up and then lists off
Right.
all the things. That's the only time
Right.
it's actually allowed.
I'm not looking forward to that.
So anyway, I just
Right.
wanted to put this out there. And so what we're trying
Thanks.
to do is like, what are the mind skills? How can us polymaths figure it out? Go, okay, obviously now we know we're polymaths. What are we doing that we can teach other people? And as Block Muse, who's in there, who's got the Arabic around the yellow gold or Arabic around his profile there, he's mentioned too, like with the metaverse, Web3, there is going to be an accelerated growth of polymaths. We're already seeing it. And so we want to know what can we do to help that growth. So there's going to be a growth in numbers of polymaths, and there's going to be a growth in how fast you can become one. Now, something that from the old Renaissance days, in some ways it was easier to become a polymath, even because there was only a small amount of information to learn. So if you think about science, like look at Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, back then they were barely even dissecting cadabras. It was actually illegal in many places to dissect a cadabra. And so the learnings of medicine was very minimal. So it didn't take as long to learn everything there was to learn about medicine, for example, at the time. However, now, I mean, medicine by the week is crazy, right? Like we get all these collaborative minds from all over the world feeding each other and growing each other.
Medical knowledge doubles every 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's extremely hard to become an expert at any one field. However, that what we gauge as an expert is different. So, top of the world versus there's different ranges in that, right? So we just want to say that we want to find out this metaverse. And George, I see you open up the floor, so I do want to hear from Simon and stuff too, but I'd like for you to just predefine what you mean by going meta is. Like I've heard you say it, but I feel like you kind of talk around it, and it's hard for people to grasp what that means, because it's truly the root of why I think polymaths excel. So some of you have heard, before he goes into it, of emotional quotient. So, or emotional intelligence. And quite a while ago, Travis Bradberry and some other big people came up and said, hey, the biggest determiner of success is not actually IQ. It's more than likely going to be what's called your EQ, or emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence. And you can actually go online and do an assessment. And it's the ability for emotional regulation. It's for this ability to be able to assess ourselves, assess the world, and then regulate ourselves. And that alone. And I personally think that polymaths have a very high EQ, and we have a very high what's called resilience factor. So when we start, as we go along, you want to be part of this movement, we want to start studying this. What are the commonalities between polymaths? Can we start identifying them in children? Can we start to help them out, or can we teach them so more of them come along? Like EQ, for example, is a huge amount of self-awareness and the ability to be open-minded with new information. So I'm going to pass it over to George about what he means by going meta, because he talks about that a lot. It's the base of his mind skills.
Thank you. Boy, you bring up a whole bunch of things.
I get a little passionate about all this.
Yeah, I know. Just for the record, I am not in the school that likes the idea of EQ. I don't know how to say this briefly. It's the whole idea of intelligence is nonsense. Alfred Binet, who invented the IQ test, I've done I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of Binet IQ tests back when I was a school psychologist. He believed there was no such thing as intelligence. He believed that, and I think he was right. And then the psychologists picked it up as a thing, and they made a thing out of emotional intelligence and social intelligence, the 7 intelligences of Gardner. And Gardner himself said there is no experimental basis to it. The whole thing is bullshit. And so what Samantha's talking about is real. There's no question that there are social skills and there are emotional skills. These are mind skills. They are learnable. They are not inherent. That's what my objection to the whole concept of intelligence as a thing. The IQ is just a score of the probability of success in the French school system. That's what it was. They needed a way to estimate who was going to be successful in school, who was not going to be successful, so they could weed out the people that they didn't want to invest education into. That's what the IQ test was. It later became the Wechsler test and other IQ tests, and it became a thing. And it's not a thing. It's a bunch of skills. And there are people who have low IQ, relatively low IQs, like Feynman. 128 is like low for a physicist. But he was one of the top 3 physicists in the 20th century. There are other skills that make up for it. So there are, of course, what Samantha says, there are emotional skills. There aren't, but look, people learn emotional skills. And going meta is knowing the process that you're in. It's very hard. That was the hardest thing in group dynamics training. We would do all these groups, and the hardest thing for me to learn, and for all of us to learn, it was excruciatingly hard, was to pay more attention to the process than the content. People are saying things, and all kinds of stuff is going on, cognitive and emotional stuff, and all kinds of things happening. But what's really going on in the group? What's the process we're in right now? That is very hard for some people to grasp. And what's the mental process that I'm in? When I started studying how these great people think, Galileo was the first one when I was 17. Galileo, Da Vinci, and Sherlock Holmes were my big ones. And I explicitly were reading about them. How did they think? It turns out just about every great thinker, I think without exception, I can't name an exception, every great thinker has written about extensively how they think. In other words, they thought about their thinking. You've got to think about your thinking. How are you thinking? Is this the best kind of thinking I'm doing? Thinking is not just about logic. Yes, to be a good critical thinker, it's nice to know the 150 logical fallacies in their Latin names. But, knowing the 20 or 25 worst ones that CNN and Fox News uses 60 times an hour, oh, that's a great underestimation. 300 times an hour. You can listen to almost anybody on CNN and Fox and literally get 3 logical fallacies a minute. If I was teaching a course on logical fallacies, I would use videotapes from CNN and Fox. And MSNBC, oh my God, worse than that. They're the worst by far. But yeah, it's worth knowing those. But that's not the essence of critical thinking. You need imagination. You need creativity. You need a whole lot of other things. Maybe as a creativity method, you need free association. So, okay, I'm going to let go of my logical thinking, which I utterly love, particularly analytic thinking, and I'm going to just free associate and see what comes up. I had a client who had a big bowl on his desk of words that were on little pieces of plastic, tiny little ones, like 3/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch, with one word on it. And we'd be talking about something and brainstorming. He was the most brilliant marketing researcher I've ever met. He was market research director for Roche Labs, and we'd get into something. We'd be trying to figure out something, and he'd reach into his bowl and he'd take out two words, try to take out an adjective and a noun, and he'd put them together. And let's say we'd say flying pigs would be the two words. He'd say, "What do flying pigs have to teach us about this problem?" And bang, we would, because the mind works that way. The mind would feed us stuff, and we'd be off and running, brainstorming and coming up with crazy, wild ideas. Um, and he and I and a bunch of other people were really responsible for the success of Valium, which became the largest selling drug in the world, by this kind of process. So if you know what the process is and you have skill at changing processes, that's what going meta is. And that's really the heart of MindSkills. What are all these different skills? What are all these different processes? What are all these different ways of doing things? There's a whole different set for the specialists. How do you specialize? How do you zero in? How do you analyze? How do you synthesize? Now they carry over. They're not disparate skills. They're not unrelated skills. They're not non-overlapping skills. The word is orthogonal. They're not non-orthogonal, but they're overlapping, but they're different emphasis on different skills. So that's kind of what going meta is. That's that's the short version.
Can you explain it to, let's say,
by the way, there's an article. There's an article in the MindSkills playbook. Go to my Twitter profile. There's a link there to the MindSkills playbook, and the article is, I don't have time to put it in the nest here. The article is "Go Meta or Go Home." Go meta or go home. That's my article on going meta, and I don't have an article on polymaths yet in the MindSkills playbook. But
George, can you just put it in a nutshell? Like if I was, like, just imagine I was your grandson and you took everything that you just said and you had a little bit of attention from him. He's looking right at you and he says, "Grandpa, please tell me again so I can understand it. What does going meta mean?"
Wow, that's a challenge. I would say, how sometimes you're learning and listening to the teacher and writing down what the teacher's saying. Sometimes you're in the schoolyard playing. Sometimes when the teacher is teaching you, you are looking out the window and you're daydreaming. Those are different, we call them mental modes. And I teach them the word modes, M-O-D-E-S. Those are different modes that you're in. And I'm going to ask you the next few days, what mode am I in? And we're going to play a little game, and you're going to tell me what's been going on in your mind. Sometimes you're in reading modes. He loves comic books, or what do they call them? Graphic novels now. Sometimes you're reading a graphic novel, and you're just reading, and you're there. But sometimes you might be thinking about what you just read. So we're going to learn how to do that and learn how to switch from one to the other. That's my best cut at it. I think we all love that. That's a great challenging question. I love that question. I'm going to work on that.
Yeah, well, and your grandson's home right now, or you've had your grandson there, so I thought that would be recent to you. For anyone who wants to read that article that you referred to, Go Meta or Go Home, I posted it in the nest up top. And when you look at that, it will connect you to his book that George is writing in public. So you'll notice that when you go, there's an outline and then a number of chapters. Some of the chapters you'll see say, to be written, or I'm going to insert this because he's writing it as he goes along. So you'll notice that. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's a mess in terms of organization. Each article I'm very proud of is quite well organized, but it itself is not well organized. I need more work on organization. So I apologize for the lack of tightness in the organization. I know Dr. M has pointed this out to me very tactfully a few times. But it's also deliberately written to be, what's the word for it? Randomly accessible, let's say. In other words, it's not linear like a book. You start at chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. There are a few books that are written where you can dip in at any page. So look at the table of contents, see what leaps out to you. That's your subconscious mind saying to you, I'm ready for this. So read that. Don't read the first thing. I mean, if I was asked what's the first thing to read, I'd read the page that says start here. But then it was go into what mind skills are. And the most important mind skill I would start with is going meta, as Samantha's pointing out. But you don't have to. If there's something else that's there. Like last night, I was talking a lot in the Positivity Vibe Tribe about handling your emotions, particularly how do you handle fear? Well, there are 4 articles in there about handling unwanted emotions, particularly fear. It's a whole different methodology, not the Stoics methodology, not the Buddhist methodology. I think those are only good as far as they go, but they don't go far enough. There's a whole methodology for handling unwanted emotions. And if that's what you really want, you're being troubled by fear and anger and depression and what guilt and other unwanted emotions, that's where I'd start. That's absolutely where I'd start. So dip into it according to what you want and what you need. But I meant this to be about polymaths, not about mind skills. But so let's get back to polymaths. Anything else? Anything? Should we open the floor for questions?
Absolutely. Yes.
I think we should do that. If you have a question, now here's the thing. Some of you are just discovering you're a polymath, and you are gushing with enthusiasm. We know, believe me, we've been there. And some of us have just had the experience of meeting other polymaths and getting friendly with them and meeting other people who get us. And it's a thrill. It is a high. And some of you are experiencing that high. Some of you are crying and you're on the verge of tears. We know this from running other groups. The overwhelming probability is there are 2 or 3 people in here who are in tears that finally they heard, and there's a name for this affliction they've been told they have. This disorder, attention deficit disorder. They've been told they've got this disorder, and
Right.
they have, and they're crying now because I'm saying it's a superpower. We're saying it's a superpower. It's the best thing about you, not the worst thing about you. You just have to harness it. Of course, you have to know what to do with it, but it's wonderful. It's fabulous. And you're gushing with enthusiasm, and you want to read your list, or at least you want to read 6 things on your list. I'm of this, I'm of this, I'm of this. Please, that's just going to eat up time. We get it. We get it. We get it. How proud of it you are, and now it's unleashed. So let's not waste time on that. What I'd like to ask people to do, since we have very limited time, let's just do questions. A focused, simple, focused question. If you in 1 sentence if you can, 3 sentences if you can't, first sentence context, second question, third follow-up, whatever, but a focused question on this subject. Who'd like to jump in? Anybody? Request speaker. And I do not like to call on people. So when, as, and if you're ready, just jump in. And when you do, use your name. And by the way, when you're doing it, we're recording this. This is going to be on YouTube as well. It's YouTube Live.
It's already on YouTube Live. It's going out as we speak.
Right. So you just know this. By speaking, you are thereby giving your permission basically for us to use this in any way we want, in whole or in part, and in any way whatsoever. If you're not comfortable with a blanket permission like that, don't come up. But if you do, we welcome you and with open arms. So who's got a question first?
Sure. I believe Jackie does.
Sure. Go ahead, Jackie.
Good morning. Mine isn't a question. I just wanted to say thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I've been hearing this term and wanting to fully understand it and get more information on it. So I just wanted to say, as I listened in today, I learned and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for the acknowledgement, Jackie. I really appreciate it. You have no idea how much that means, by the way. You know, when people do something that's helpful to you, acknowledge
Jackie's
it.
got the hundreds.
Yeah.
Way to go, Jackie,
Jeez.
with the hundreds.
Yeah. Where'd you get those?
Yeah,
Where do I get some of them hundreds?
Oh, you know, secrets. Just kidding.
Oh,
I didn't
man.
update my account.
Now I got to go look at her profile, see if she's part of Twitter. She's probably part of Twitter. No,
Or she
no,
just
she's
hasn't
not.
updated her app in a long time.
Yeah, this she
That's
is.
right.
Right. Well,
Yeah, well, I think that words have power. And yesterday was a wonderful day for me because I was shown great gratitude by a lot of people. And I think that showing gratitude for people is so important in life. So
yes.
I did learn
And,
a lot.
let me jump off on that for a second. If you're a polymath, and I suspect most of you are because that's why you're here, this area of gratitude and acknowledgement to yourself first. Be grateful and show appreciation for your polymathy. It's not everybody
right.
who can do this kind of stuff. Be proud
Embrace
of it. Be intensely embrace it. That's perfect. Thank you, Simon. Embrace your polymathy. It's wonderful. Other people are going to think you're a braggart. So, tone it down around other people who are non-polymaths. You got to tone it down a little bit. But to yourself, no. To yourself, really be proud of it. And if you're Catholic and have been taught the sin of pride, then you're going to have to deal with that. I think that is personally, I think it's a terrible thing to be teaching people the sin of pride. Of course, they mean false pride, and there's nothing wrong with condemning false pride. But to yourself, no. Exactly. To yourself, whoops, we're getting feedback from Simon's line. Okay, so be careful of, you don't want to brag, you don't want false pride, but what is genuinely earned by you, what you genuinely do, and the best things about you, acknowledge them to yourself. It's really important, really important. Who's got another question or comment? I strongly prefer questions.
I have a question.
Sure. Ruben?
It's a very simple question.
That's Ruben.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I broke
use
the protocol.
Use your name when you talk, when you first come in. So
Copy
first
that.
name is okay, whole name, whatever you want to do. But
Certainly.
That's Ruben. Go ahead, Ruben.
So my name is Ruben Metcalf. I'm a New Zealander living in America. And my question has a one-sentence context, which is, I heard the phrase metacognition, which was described as thinking about thinking.
Yes, exactly.
Same thing? Same page?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, metacognition is thinking about thinking, right? And that's exactly what it is. And it's a whole gigantic field of psychology. Gigantic. It is utterly fascinating. And I mean, if I was still a psychologist, that probably would be my field, or I would split it between group dynamics, which is just passion of mine. I just absolutely love running groups, facilitating groups. I was, as far as I know, the first one to do what's now called social media. 1969, by telephone conference call, special interest groups of photographers, gourmet cooks, and world travelers. My friend and I started a company called Telesession. We started it, and then we went from that to telephone focus groups. But if I was still a psychologist, formal psychologist, I would be that would be my specialty, metacognition.
And so would it be fair to
meta emotion. It is not just thinking about thinking, but I would expand it to thinking about feeling too. What are feelings? What are they telling us? What are they signaling? How do you deal with them?
So it sounds like perhaps the delineation between mind skills and metacognition would be perhaps more related to sort of like a multimodal form of observation and processing of information. Yeah?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by, but the
Thinking and feeling, for
sorry,
example.
right. The going meta is and metacognition is a prerequisite for
Right. That makes
mind
sense.
skills. It's a prerequisite. If you can't go meta, you can't learn mind skills because you have to know what process you're in
Yeah.
as you're doing it, and you have to be able to observe not just see people talk about self-awareness, and they're 99.9% of the time they are talking about awareness of your thoughts and feelings, which is very important. Very important. But there's another thing besides your thoughts and your feelings. It's the process. That's the hard thing. That's the thing that people are unaware of.
But George,
And
I think
they're
that polymaths aren't necessarily in aware that they're doing them. They just do them
right,
well. So
right.
like some people ask me, how do you do so much? Well, I didn't like even when you and I talk, I'm like, I don't know, I just do that. And I didn't realize that I'm all about efficiencies. People ask me about productivity, and I'm always like, well, no, I'm about efficiency. So, like, for example, when I'm being with my kids, it's hard sometimes, especially right now when I'm planning a relaunch, but like I have to try to shut everything out and go, okay, I'm in mom mode right now. And everything I do has to be focused 100% on making sure my child feels heard, making sure
Mhm.
I'm building relationship. And so I'm very conscious about I'm in mom mode right now. But I didn't know that I was intentionally doing that.
Yes,
I
that's
just
a
know that
very good.
it's efficient
Right.
because
It's a very
otherwise,
good.
if she
Yeah,
doesn't feel heard, it's going to cause me problems later, which means I'm going to have less time to do stuff I really want to do
I
because she's going to cause problems.
right. I have a better example, and it's about you. You described several times to me in private conversations how you solved somebody's problem. And I said, Samantha, the way you did that is you took what you so in another area you used what first of all I asked you how did you do that, and you couldn't describe it to me, but I know enough about polymath so I could describe it to you, which was you you took what you learned you did in tax planning and uh, and you applied it to this entrepreneur guy, and you took what you knew about human people and didn't just look at the guy's spreadsheets. You looked at his passion for his business. He was trying to decide between four businesses. You told him follow, basically, to make a very long story short, you basically told him follow your passion. You read his passion, not his spreadsheets, not his P&L. Um, you read his passion. How did you know to do that? Well, you knew that to do that because of of your experience in a lot of other things, and you knew he was in the wrong process. He was trying to analyze financially, and that wasn't the way to decide which of his businesses to concentrate on. The way to decide on it was passion. So
Right. But
that's
because I have finance, I'm a CFO, but also all those years I did taxes, I have
right,
credibility, and I have credibility with finances because I can
right,
create financial statements. So he understood that. But what we're saying to all of you is that you can actually accelerate your polymathy if you're more aware of it, because
right,
you can be more efficient at getting there faster than some of us did, or leveraging it more than we did. Like I didn't know until I was 42 years old that this was a good thing. Like that's crazy. 42 years old before I stepped into my skin and started to feel comfortable in my own skin. I can't even imagine where I'd be if I'd learned that when I was 20 something. So some of the
right,
people who are coming into the Medici modern polymath community, our mastermind community, some of them are in their mid 20s. And I just can't imagine, like, with our mentorship, where they're going to be
right,
in 20 years compared to where we were with nobody's help.
right.
So that's
Exactly.
phenomenal. So what George is trying to teach you is a conscious decision to switch your state so that you are efficient and optimizing in all your levels. So
Well said.
yeah, that's what he's trying to teach.
Very well said. Thank you. Yep. Other people, again, I don't want to call on people. Jump in when you have something to say or you have a question. I prefer questions because we need to try to keep it tight. Try to, I was going to keep this as an hour, but we'll stop at the top of this hour, which will make it 2 hours. I think that's quite enough for anybody to listen to on the replay.
Just to jump in then.
Okay, Jackie was first. Go ahead, Jackie.
Ruben can go.
I was Afzal.
Oh, sorry.
Hello, everyone. Radio check. I am Afzal from Lahore. Raj, can you hear me? That's
I can hear you fine.
Yesterday,
we can hear perfect.
Yesterday, I could not speak to you. I'm very happy to speak to you, George. You are a great mentor.
Thank you.
I'm learning a lot. Yeah, thank you very much. My question is very specific. I come from the background. I'm from Lahore, Pakistan. So my people, their education system is based on rote learning. So reason here is highly rated. Intuition is absolutely taken for granted. So I am into the business of teaching thinking skills, and Twitter Spaces are the most challenging, part of this whole effort of mine since last about 20-30 years. So my question is how to deal with heckling on Twitter Spaces when it comes on to a person. Heckling. Yeah, yesterday you touched upon it, but I just want you to, if you can just elaborate it a little more.
Heckling.
Yeah, young people, they come on to, they just want to cut you. They just don't want you to speak about thinking because they're on to philosophy, they're on to logic, they're on to, the part which is part of our, thinking part, which is based on using their mind or brain when it comes on to their education system. Which is all logical, which is all memory, which is all rote learning. So they don't want to listen to you. It's a new for them.
Did you?
Something
I wanted to let me go back for a second. You said in Pakistan, reason is highly rated or not rated well at all.
That is the only thing rated. You have to come up with some of the logical reference, some of the mathematical reference. Otherwise, there is no value if you just talk about.
But I don't think you get it by rote learning. I don't think you get it by rote learning. I think you get it by questioning everything. So I don't know. It's. I think the whole idea of rote learning is just anathema to me, and I could see that it could really be a problem. But let me go on to your specific question about heckling. Not sure how that applies to polymathy, but just very briefly, first of all, job number one in a space is psychological safety. So if anybody is hostile, attacking anybody, whatever, they are out and blocked. You don't get this is not 3 strikes and you're out. 1 strike, you're out. You insult somebody in my group, I kick you out. Period.
That's right.
That's it. And I don't lie. I don't say, oh, he was having some technical difficulties. I hate when moderators do that. Facilitate. I call it, there's a difference between hosting, facilitating, and moderating. Hosting is serving coffee. Moderating is keeping people in check. And facilitating is bringing them out into their full potential. So I'm a facilitator, not a moderator.
And if you're Dr. M, you're just supervising the whole time.
Right. Or making wisecracks. So, first of all, if somebody is a nasty heckler, get them out of there. And don't make a big deal of it because that's what they wanted. They want to shake things up.
Can I say something on this, George?
I would just kick them out and say, okay, that's not what we're doing here. Who would like to who else would like to jump in? Just that fast. That fast. Go ahead.
I would like to say,
Dr. M. I think Dr. M was going to jump in. And then
yeah, I was just going to say in that situation, just consider, because I used to encounter this a few months ago when I was new to Twitter Space hosting. I wouldn't want to be rude or to cut somebody off or to push them down to listener, but what you have to consider is that you have the attention and ears of many people in that space. And to bring that vibe down in order for one person to get freedom of expression or whatever you want to call that is just not worth it. And I mean, it's just, the pros and cons are in favor of and not allowing a person who's going to bring everybody's psyche, relatively speaking, let's say a bit to be negative or down. It's just better that they don't get to have their freedom of expression, and that others don't get brought down.
Right. Good point. Yep. Also, a lot of polymaths are running spaces, and they really need to put more attention on group dynamics. Look up group dynamics in Wikipedia. You will see it's 150 different subjects. It's a giant branch of psychology. I studied it for over 2 years. It's gigantic. There are a lot of different things you can do in groups, and people are not studying it too well, and they really need to. Some are doing quite well intuitively, spectacularly well intuitively. Other people are making a mess of it and shutting down conversation. I'll leave it at that. But to handle hecklers, another thing to do is what us magicians do. When I get a heckler in the audience, I get him on stage and I make him the assistant magician, and the magic happens in his hands instead of my hands. And now he's got to be my ally because I'm saying things to him like, "How the hell did you do that?" He'll have somebody pick a card in the audience and it'll end up in his pocket. Well, how the hell did it? I obviously put it in his pocket in a way that nobody, including him or the audience, saw. There are ways to do that. And it comes out of his pocket. Everybody has a laugh. Everybody in the room knows somehow I got that card into his pocket, even though they didn't see me do it. My friend Apollo Robbins can steal your belt and your wallet and, probably your socks while you're on stage, and nobody sees him do it. Now, I'm not as good as Apollo in that particular thing, but I can do a little of it because he taught it to me. So I can, distract people and do it in a way that, but so you can make somebody but the heckler wants attention. Usually, that's the simple end. So if you give them attention, sometimes it feeds it, sometimes it satisfies them. That's hard to know.
It's a craft, and so you'll learn it over time. In fact, interestingly enough, in our mastermind community, in our Modern Polymaths mastermind community, George is actually doing a session for us tomorrow on how to facilitate the best discussions you ever heard. And it is on his facilitation formula for our members. So he's going to be working with us because many of us are running spaces and live audio. And so, and even if we're not doing it on the audio global platform, we're doing it in life, whether we're on committees or boards or whatever else. So it's a really great skill to learn. But George, I know you only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm not sure how you want to, or a little bit.
Yeah, I think Jackie was going to ask a question, then we'll need to wrap it up, I think.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I think I have a lag. I was actually just DMing Samantha to say sorry because I know that I've interrupted 2 people that were trying to speak.
No, it's okay. No.
Okay, I apologize. So I think after this conversation, I would identify as a polymath. Going back to what Samantha was bringing up about polymath and efficiency, I'm extraordinarily prolific and I'm extraordinarily efficient. So do you think
I didn't hear the first word, especially, what did you say before efficient?
Prolific.
Prolific. I got you. Thank you.
And I'm just wondering, do y'all think that as far as being a polymath, that you have a heightened skill of efficiency?
Well, yes. Because you're Absolutely. Like, I want to do as much as I possibly can in my lifetime, and how the heck am I going to do that? And we also only want to do the stuff we love. So how do we take the stuff we don't love and minimize it to the least amount possible so we can do the stuff we love? So I think it's just they naturally feed each other.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons we're so proficient is the 80-20 rule, or the 150 rule is the third order generation of it, second order, I think. We're very efficient at it. So I know this article I wrote on emotions is not going to be as good as it's going to be next year. But man, you never read anything like this about emotions. You never have read anything like this. It's a method of, so I want to get the method out. So bang, it's out there. It's 80%. That article is 80%. But it's better. It's the best thing you ever read about emotions. I guarantee it.
I'm super curious with this. One last question.
Sure.
Do you feel like polymaths, since they have such a wide variety of ways of doing things and interests and passions and efficiency, I'm a big proponent of efficient communication. Since we have all this ability,
yes.
Do you feel like we have higher emotional intelligence? Not only emotional intelligence, but the way to effective communicate to the other people that communicate in different aspects.
Yes, we are. First of all, you used the first phrase. You had me at the phrase, I'm super curious. Because you are super curious, and we polymaths are super curious. Super curiosity is the, you don't have to, you don't have to preface it by super curious. We are super curious, and that's our strength. To answer your question specifically, what was the question now? Because I got distracted by super curious. Oh yes, efficient communication. I got it. Yes, we are very impatient. And coming back to what Atzo was asking about, hecklers, I don't see him here. Did he drop off? Must have dropped off. See, I have no trouble. I'm a New Yorker, so I have no trouble interrupting people. And I don't have any patience for ramblers. If you want to come into one of my spaces and ramble, you're going to get cut off at the third or fourth sentence. I would hope that you're going to be cut off rather skillfully. I have a lot of techniques for doing that. I pick up on one of the points the person made, et cetera, et cetera. There are tactful and constructive ways of doing it. And there are also destructive or conversation shutting down methods of doing it. And sometimes you want to use those for the hecklers. But mostly there are, so we really want efficient communication. And now the specialists have a way of communicating very efficiently that we don't have, and that is jargon. There's good jargon and bad jargon, but good jargon is very efficient because they have all these specialized words and they know what it means. They know what these words mean, and they can communicate super efficiently, quickly. I was always amazed by the dermatologists. You'll appreciate this, Saman. The dermatologists have 74 different names for rashes. They can describe rashes with a degree of accuracy and orally, verbally, without showing pictures. They can precisely describe what that skin condition is. And it's amazing. And most of us don't know the words. And so we don't know what the hell they're talking about, but it works for them. It works spectacularly for them. And I'm sure the same is true of physicists and everybody else, every specialty. Polymaths tend to talk a little more down to earth, a little less technically. Usually, again, these are broad generalizations that have loads of exceptions. But they want to get it and get on with the next thing. Get it? Let's get it.
I would say, George, that what's unique about a polymath is, one, they do what you did. You recognize that there's 74 variances within the specialty, or there's a lot, which most people wouldn't even clue into. So a polymath will clue into the depth of the specialty, take that, maybe ask some questions of the specialist, and then take that and go to somebody who needs to, let's say somebody has one of those rare rashes, and just say, look, there's a wide range of these rashes. Yours falls into this category, and maybe it's grouped with like 6 other ones. Here's the real, here's the name, but this is what you would tell everyone else who wants to know what you have.
Exactly. And also I would ask, what's the, if I heard there was 74, I'd say, okay, what categories do they fall into? Because I know
Right.
you can't have, I
Right.
know
Is
enough
one
about
contagious?
learning.
Yeah,
You
maybe
can't have
one's
74
contagious.
without having
One,
major categories. So
most
what's
people
the,
want to know, is it contagious? Does it fall into contagious or not?
right,
So like a polymath would be able to easily like get very quickly down to what does that most people want to know about that. And I did that
right,
with taxes too, right? Like I took within my specialty, we use form names. Like I'm Canadian. So we'd like, oh, did you get the 1013 on that? Oh, that guy needs a T183. Well, everyone knew what those numbers meant in my
right,
specialty.
right,
But if I
right, right,
said them to my client, oh, you need to sign a T183, they would just look at me and go, what? So
right,
I'd be like, oh,
exactly.
you need to file. And then I would put the name of the form. I rarely gave them the form name, but a lot of specialists didn't do that. And then my clients, like I had a lineup of people wanting to come because they learned, because I spoke at their level. I always spoke at their level. I didn't use the jargon. So
Yeah.
that's very unique to polymaths.
You reminded me of a focus group I did of dermatologists once where I said my summary, it broke them up completely. My summary was, okay, so what you're telling me is all of dermatology can be boiled down to this. If it's wet, dry it. If it's dry, wet it. If it bulges, pierce it.
Right.
And they all just cracked up because they had studied 30 years to do that. And
Exactly. And that's what a
that was a
polymath can
wild
do very quickly.
oversimplification. It's a wild oversimplification, but it was accurate. Yeah.
But also, George, by the way, is an accomplished chef. So for him to come up with an analogy very quickly on the fly is because he has other specialties. So we're
Right.
able to take those and come up with analogies that that make the general audience catch on to them very quickly, because we can pull other analogies. Like I'll use photography analogies a lot because a lot of people understand a zoom lens versus a wide angle lens. So I can just say, back, I can use those terms very quickly
But and you
when
can apply
when I'm
zoom.
speaking.
You can apply a zoom lens to going meta.
Right,
Because
exactly.
with your mind, you can focus in very narrowly as with a telephoto lens or a macro lens.
Right.
You can go very wide as with a wide angle lens. You can so you've got the principles of focus and perspective and selective focus and all this kind of stuff that's directly analogous to MindSkills and particularly to going meta.
And so, Jackie, what you were saying, it's in our best interest to explain something very quickly so that we can get on to what else we want to talk about or move on to or learn. So yes, we become very efficient at explaining things because it's in our best interest, because we don't want to sit there and talk forever trying to explain some complex concept to somebody. And they still don't get it. So we're like, okay, how can I explain this super simply so they get it and we can move on with the conversation? So it's out of necessity and survival, because our survival is based on learning and doing as much as we possibly can while not wasting our time on small talk. So, or trying to get someone to understand something very complex if we
right.
want to include them in the conversation. And I would just say before we close, I'm a little bit different than George when it comes to like hecklers and people who don't understand or who come in and are a little disruptive. My first approach is always to validate people and take people as they're not necessarily trying. Well, some people are trying to be disruptors, but I try to go in with the fact that a lot of people just don't have necessarily good social skills, or we're global. They've
Right.
got different things coming in or different understandings. So I always come in, and if somebody's getting off track or going crazy in a room a little bit, first thing I do is I hit the mute button. I know George doesn't love that, but I hit the mute button so that they're not over talking me. And then I'm just like, hey, look, you're super passionate about, and then whatever it is they're talking about. I know there's spaces where they love to talk about this particular subject. Today, we're talking about this. Do you have a contribution to talk about polymaths and mind skills
Right.
today? And that's how I usually handle
Yep.
the disrupt, if I'm going to call them disruptors. I just validate, because for me, I'm always about trying to make it feel safe in the room so that nobody feels like they may say something dumb when they come up and they're like, oh, they misunderstood, or I didn't read the room properly. So I'm a little bit different of an approach. I'm like,
Right.
let's make this room safe. Everyone feel like they're being validated. Now, if you continue to be like that, well, then, that's a
She's
different
so
thing.
much more tactful than I am. Like in the
Yeah.
Twitter audit space, they call me Simon Cowell.
And I've mentored
Because
young adults for 2.5
right,
years. And
right,
so I
right.
learned to be very gentle with them and
Yes,
validate
exactly.
with them while mentoring them at the same
Yeah,
time.
my
Yes.
wife, who is a psychologist, says, focus on the intent, not what they're doing. Not they don't have the skills, but what's the intent? But sometimes the intent is malicious. It's absolutely outright malicious, and you don't tolerate it at all. But yeah, it's.
I think that's beautiful. I'm definitely with like the kindness and what
That's
you
Jackie.
said earlier is about asking questions. I like to identify what the problem is in order to address it. But what you just said was so beautiful. Usually I write down quotes, but I'm not by my notebook. Is the fact that like I don't know your exact words. It was like the last sentence you said.
Who? Samantha or me?
George.
Oh, it would be in that otter transcript. If you want to look back at anything, I put the otter transcript in the thread of the space. So if anyone wants to go back and grab some pieces, you can get that in the chat in the bottom right-hand corner. It's attached to the actual space. It's available for lifetime replay. And in the thread, I attached to the transcript of this space from Otter, so you can go back and check anything.
Yeah, you can read the entire transcript, word for every single word that was said today. You can read it in the Otter transcript.
Quote it or whatever,
And it's and Otter is just unbelievably wonderful. I was down on it for a little while because it keeps bombing out on me in Chrome. If you use it in Firefox. They haven't fixed the Chrome problems yet, but they've been wonderfully responsive about it. It's an amazing thing. It uses artificial intelligence to do a transcript, and then it does a repass later on. About an hour from now, it'll be even more accurate. So the first cut is usually pretty good. The next cut is better. And it assigns
speakers if it knows them. So like I probably in George's database, so it'll automatically assign me to my sections because him and I speak enough that I'm assuming you would have assigned me at some point. So it'll probably pick up mine. Yeah. And so you'll be able to see some of the speakers.
Yep, absolutely. So everybody, this was very interesting to me. A challenge to see what I could get into an hour. So we cheated a little bit and went to 2 hours. I hope that nobody will hold that against us. We did hold the audience pretty well. And it's going to be interesting to see how many people came through this space. I know some of you wanted to speak and came up from speaker to listener and speaker, and apologize that we couldn't speak to everybody. But I was really trying to cram as much content as I possibly could. There'll be plenty of other Polymath sessions for people. I can't remember who's going to be next week, but each of us trying to do at least one per week. Everybody in the Polymath community, that is the Medici Modern Polymath community, is trying to do one a week, and we've split it up. And I can't remember who's next. It might be Gia. I'm not sure. I don't remember who's next week.
If you want to know, just DM me and I'll keep you on a list and I'll DM you. Our new website will have a spot so that we can post when we're the host will be able to just post when we're having an event, and you'll be able to just go to the website and look, but that's not going to be up for a few more weeks.
And we'll be doing very different topics, very different styles.
Yeah, everybody's a different style.
And we're all looking at it from a different way. Da Vinci, the polymath of all polymaths, said that you cannot know something unless you look at it from at least 3 perspectives. So every anatomical drawing he did was bottom, top, side, minimum. Sometimes he did more than 3 aspects, he called them. 3 different perspectives. So you can only know something from multiple perspectives, and we are really getting to know polymathy.
Also, too, just before we go, George, if anyone wants to kind of go back to a bit more of a basic, a couple weeks ago, George and a guy named Dan, he's in there with the big M on it in the audience, in the listener group there. We ran a space a few weeks ago on how to know if you're a polymath, and there is a very funny questionnaire in there. So we laughed a lot.
Yes.
Like I think half the space was laughing. We laugh at ourselves a lot, by the way. So if you're interested, if you go to my timeline, the pinned tweet is that space, and in the thread is the questionnaire, and you are going to laugh. Like you will laugh at yourself.
Yes.
A lot. It's really fun. And the questionnaire was made up from the community. We like literally ran a mastermind group, and we just like literally just about Peter Pants the entire time laughing at ourselves. It's like questions like,
my favorite.
How do you know if you're polymath? Or how many tabs do you have open right now? And it's like, do you mean just in Chrome? Or do I include both my browsers, or do I include my iPhone, my
favorite
iPad,
one,
and all my browsers?
my favorite one, which is absolutely true, is you're a polymath if Google keeps asking you if you're a bot. If you use Google so much that it keeps asking you if you're a bot.
I don't think we put that one in the final list, but that is a good one.
That's the
yeah,
one. Because
we
I
had a
just
lot
got
of them,
asked.
but there was
I just
10.
got
So
asked
if you,
twice this morning by Google
yeah,
whether
oh,
you're a
that's
bot.
fun. Yeah, so you can go to my pinned tweet there, and down there is the questionnaire, and there's also a space there where we talk about how to know if you're a polymath.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and thank you, Saman and Samantha, for helping me out in this group. Wow, this is such a favorite subject. I feel like I go on for another 3 hours, so we will stop it here. Thank everybody, and please, DMs are open. If you have a question, if it's a private question, obviously ask it privately. If it's a question that you think other people might be interested in, then tag me in a tweet. I'll see it and we can answer it publicly so other people can benefit. I love getting asked questions. I love getting asked stumper questions that I don't know the answer to. That's my favorite kind of question, the ones that make me think. So if I don't know the answer, I will find out or I'll think about it. I'll do my damnedest to get the answer because you will definitely pique my curiosity. If on this subject, if you can come up with a question I haven't thought of, and Jackie probably can, some other people probably can, that would be a great service to me. I mean, I really get a kick out of being asked a question I never considered before. In my discussions with Ayn Rand, the novelist, that's what turned her on the most. And that's why she talked to me. I think that's why she liked me, because I asked her questions. I used to call them stumpers. I tried to ask her questions so I could see how her mind worked. That was what I was interested in. Yeah, her philosophy, I was interested in that. But what I was really interested in was she was probably going to be the smartest person I ever met in my life. Turned out she was. I never met anybody more brilliant than that. And I wanted to know how her mind worked. So I did it by asking her questions about things she hadn't considered. So if you ask me about something I haven't considered, man, I would just love it. So shoot the questions if you want. And thank you all very, very much for participating. And I know even if you were listening, if you were here this long, you were participating. So thank you all very much, and catch you on the next road. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Yep, you can put notifications on, for any of the speakers so that you know when we're running spaces.
Right. Also, you can find in the chat, that's just a Twitter thread. So if you want to add anything more to I will be reading the whole chat later on, after I get a little rest here. But you can, and feel free, that's not frozen. So you can actually continue the discussion in the chat, and I will definitely be there, not the next half hour, but I'll be there eventually. So either way you want to do it, tagging me in a tweet, which means just putting @George Silverman in the tweet. Don't put it as the first thing in the tweet for technical reasons. That just limits it more to me and not to other people. Some people put a period before it, or some people just include it in the. So just tag me in a tweet, DM me, or get involved in the chat. Okay, closing the space. Thank you all very much.